This Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World retrospective was brought to you by my lovely patron, Cameron Strauss. For as little as $3 Australian a month, you can get your name shouted out at the start of every Xenosanctum video, as well as access to bonus behind the scenes content, link in the description below. A sequel that until recently wasn't even considered part of the mainline Tales games. This game is often maligned by fans of Symphonia, who feel like it falls short of its predecessor, and has only one saving grace in the nostalgic callbacks to the original game. Now as for me, I do not have that same attachment to the original Tales of Symphonia. Will this kill the game's one saving grace, or will it allow me to appreciate this game in a way most fans do not? Let's find out as I look back on 2008's Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World for the Nintendo Wii. There is literally nothing on this game's development in the development section of the Wikipedia article. It's almost as if no one wants us to know that they made this game. Unfortunately for them, I can do a bit more research outside of Wikipedia, so here we go. The decision to make a sequel for Tales of Symphonia would occur around mid-2007, following the release of Tales of Fandom Volume 2, a strange spin-off game that would require its own video to explain. With Symphonia being the most successful Tales game sales-wise, a sequel to the game seemed like a good idea. 2008 would also mark Symphonia's 5th anniversary, thus, just like with Tales of Destiny 2, this new sequel would also come out 5 years after the original. On a side note, for those following this whole Tales of Retrospective series, is anyone else shocked that despite all the games we've done retrospectives on, we've only actually covered 5 years of Tales history? Like between Tales of Destiny 1 and 2, there was only one new Tales game between both releases, yet here we've covered 5 since Symphonia, once again showing how insane the output of Tales games were in the late 2000s. On the topic of insane outputs, Tales of Symphonia 2 would be developed in-house by the Namco Tales Studio, despite the studio also working on 2 other Tales games due to be released in 2008 as well. Ichi Kikuchi and Kiyoshi Nagai would return from Tales of Symphonia to help direct this game, along with newcomer Akihiro Arahori. Masasuke Hiromatsu would write the plot for the game, getting assistance from Symphonia's original writer Takumi Miyajima. Tales of Symphonia 2 would recycle Future Suma's character designs, while the new characters would be designed by Daigo Okamura, who had previously worked on Tales of the Tempest. With the game being a sequel to one of the GameCube's top-selling JRPGs, it seemed fitting to put the new game on the Nintendo Wii, which at the time was facing a massive sales boom due to its unique motion controls. The plot would go through multiple rewrites, initially being set 400 years after the first game. This would later be scaled back to only 2 years, so that the original cast could appear in the game. With the game being set so soon after the events of the original game, the team decided to focus the story on the aftermath of the actions taken by Lloyd and his friends. This would involve the new characters having to awaken the great being Ratatosk in order to fix a broken world. This would be the basis for the game's name, Tales of Symphonia Knights of Ratatosk, as well as the characteristic genre of To Believe in the Resonating Hearts RPG. Tales of Symphonia Knight of Ratatosk would release in Japan on the 26th of June 2008, followed by a November release in North America. Annoyingly, the PAL region wouldn't get to play the game until November 2009. Along with the extremely staggered release date, the translation team decided to rename the Western version of the game to Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World. To my knowledge, this is the only Tales game to have its name changed for a Western release. Regardless, the game would see big sales upon its launch, as fans were all too keen to see what happened following the events of Tales of Symphonia. The story begins with a recount of the events from Tales of Symphonia and how Lloyd merged the 2 worlds of Silveront and Tethayala back into one single world. We then jump to the burning city of Palma Costa, where we see a young girl on the run while carrying a large red jewel. It is then explained that after the worlds merged, the Tethayalans began to look down on their technologically inferior Silveront brethren. This spread chaos in the population, leading crazy weather patterns to occur around the continent. In response, a group of Silverontes banded together and formed the Silveronte Liberation Front, known more simply as the Vanguard, to oppose the Tethayalans and bring glory to Silveront. Jumping back to the burning city of Palma Costa, we see the parents of one Emil Castagna being viciously murdered by Lord Irving for the supposed crime of assisting the Vanguard. Meanwhile, the girl with the jewel soon finds herself cornered by several Vanguard members. Praying to the jewel, she is suddenly enveloped in a bright light. When she awakens, she soon finds the jewel fused to her head and a mysterious blonde figure standing over the unconscious Vanguard pursuers. Without answering any of the girl's questions, the mysterious figure walks off. 6 months later, we meet Emil, now living a pretty miserable life in the town of Lewin, where he's bullied by all the townsfolk, including his aunt and uncle, due to his accusations that the hero Lloyd murdered his parents. Emil's life takes a strange turn when the mysterious man Richter Eben arrives in town, looking for a young girl named Marta Lualdi. Richter tells Emil that he needs to stand up for himself after seeing how much he gets bullied. Taking these words to heart, Emil decides to visit the dried up lake bed after hearing strange howling noises coming from there. Arriving at the lake bed, Emil is almost killed by a bear when he is saved at the last second by a young girl. The girl reveals her name to be Marta, and seems to recognise Emil as the man who saved her 6 months ago, despite Emil having no recollection of such an event. After parting ways, Marta enters a nearby cave while Emil goes back to town. Meeting Richter back in town, Emil reveals that he had found Marta. Richter then demands that Emil show him where they went, to which Emil leads him to the nearby cave. Inside the cave, Emil was shocked to find out that Richter plans to kill Marta. Emil intervenes to prevent Richter killing Marta and allowing her to escape. In return, Richter calls forth his Centurion partner Aqua, who knocks Emil out as Richter pursues Marta. When Emil awakens, he finds himself face to face with a strange black dog creature called Tenebrae. Tenebrae explains that he is what's called a Centurion, one of the 8 beings who keeps their respective elemental monsters in check. Following the splitting of the worlds, the Centurions had all gone dormant, and this is why the world's climates had gone crazy. Tenebrae reveals that he and Marta are on a quest to awaken all 8 Centurions, as well as Lord Ratatosk, master of all Centurions, in order to save the world. Tenebrae then requests Emil to form a pact and become a knight of Ratatosk, in order to save Marta, who, following the events of Palmacosta, now has Ratatosk's core fused to her forehead. While initially reluctant, Emil accepts and gains new combat powers, along with a new edgy persona that he uses to pursue after Richter in order to save Marta. The story continues from there, and sees the duo of Emil and Marta go on a quest to awaken the different elemental Centurions, while running into familiar faces from Tales of Symphonia. For the full story breakdown, you can easily find the game's cutscenes online. Meanwhile, I'll get onto the presentation. Dawn of the New World, as I'll call it from now on, brings us our first 7th gen home console Tales game. Despite the Wii lacking the HD graphics of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, it still delivers a much higher level of graphic fidelity than we've previously seen in the 6th gen Tales games. For starters, the game now supports a widescreen display, meaning I no longer need to feel conscientious about the black bars on the side of my videos. We now also have much more detailed character models, who, along with being more correctly proportioned, move much more fluidly thanks to Dawn of the New World using motion capture in multiple of the game's cutscenes. While the motion capture does bring some uncanny valley to the characters' motions, it, for the most part, looks pretty good, especially in comparison to previous 3D Tales games. Unfortunately, the addition of motion capture cutscenes has come at the expense of any anime cutscenes, with the exclusion of the opening cinematic. However, this is hardly new, with both previous Tales games lacking any in-game anime cutscenes. Being set in the merged worlds of Silveron and Tetheala, the game is littered with familiar locations from towns to dungeons, which will often see the party having to repeat the same tedious puzzles associated with those dungeons. Speaking about puzzles, after the previous games dropped the item, Dawn of the New World brings back the iconic Sorcerer's Ring along with its multiple dungeon-specific variations. The ring is now used by pointing the Wiimote at the screen while holding Z on the nunchuck. While this can be quite versatile, I detest any lack of visual notification that the ring has been used, outside of a small hissing sound. It is also kind of useless at attacking monsters like in previous Tales games. The Wii's motion controls aren't just used for the Sorcerer's Ring, as the game features multiple mini-games throughout the adventure that require motion and pointing prompts to complete. The IR pointer can also be used to navigate the player character through towns and dungeons, however I have no idea why you would use this over using the analog stick. Now you might have noticed that I haven't made any mention to navigating in the overworld. Well, that's because Dawn of the New World doesn't have one. Instead, towns are displayed on a map in which the party can quick travel to any location that has been unlocked via the story. While this might be a deal breaker for some, I personally never liked the overworld much, so it's not a big deal for me. As you might have noticed, Dawn of the New World cuts a few corners when it comes to its presentation. This in my opinion is especially true for the character designs. Throughout Emil and Marta's adventure, they'll run into all of the original Symphonia party members, minus Kratos, who for obvious reasons is not in the game. Despite being set 2 whole years since the events of Tales of Symphonia, and the game using updated character models, none of the original game's cast have decided to have a wardrobe change and still appear in their original outfits. As a result, the team has had to come up with some pretty dumb reasons for characters like Regal still being in his prisoner outfit despite no longer being a criminal. Alongside the Symphonia cast, Emil is able to use his Ratatosk powers to recruit monsters he fights into the party. The monsters can be leveled up and even evolve into more powerful monsters, leading to people often comparing this game to Pokemon. Unlike normal Tales party members, monsters are completely AI controlled. They can also be fed food, learnt from the returning Wonder Chef, to give them status boosts, as well as learning new arts via books bought from stores. On the topic of stores, with Emil and Marta being the only two characters able to change gear, shops are now exclusively focused on giving the two equipment. As a result, I frequently found my item bag filled with 20 different types of swords and spinners, as each town keeps giving you a slightly more powerful weapon. More so if you use the returning item synthesizer from Symphonia. Along with being able to buy gear, shops will also have a cat standing next to them who acts sort of like a Pokemon PC for your monsters, as well as giving out side quests the party can partake in to get more experience and materials. With Emil and Marta's party being primarily made up of monsters and Symphonia characters, there is somewhat of a lack of new friendly faces in this game. Rather, the game makes up for it in its enemies. During your quest to awaken Ratatosk, the party will frequently clash with the multiple commanders of the Vanguard. Arguably, it's these characters who are the real stars of the story, as their larger-than-life personalities frequently steal the show from the more subdued main characters, thus fighting them is always a treat. Speaking about the fights. Dawn of the New World uses the Flex Range Elemental Enhanced Linear Motion Battle System. Got it. Or more simply, the free LMBS. As the name implies, this battle system is heavily built off the Flex Range LMBS from Tales of the Abyss, although a Tales of the Abyss battle system this game is not. For starters, the game feels very sloppy, with characters taking a long time to cycle through their actions in comparison to past Tales games. A lot of arts also see the character performing giant lunges and sweeps that will often throw themselves off into space, ruining your combo game. To put it simply, I do not like this combat system. On the bright side, battles aren't too hard. Despite a lot of fights often throwing 5 to 8 enemies at you, your party is usually able to take them down with ease. Regular attacks are pretty effective in dealing solid amounts of damage, which is good because your arts burn through TP like crazy in this game. Speaking about arts, just like in the past Team Symphonia games, arts are once again on a hierarchy system which you can chain through regular attacks into a base art followed by an arcane art, although this can be changed by skills. Skills are learnt naturally via level ups and story events, but now have a cost associated with them, preventing you from equipping all your unlocked skills at once, just like you could in Tales of the Abyss. As you battle, you will need to pay attention to the elemental grid displayed at the bottom corner of the screen. This grid changes based off the different elemental attacks made, and will change the effectiveness of attacks made using the same element, as well as your chance of recruiting new monsters into your party. However, the main purpose of the elemental grid comes into play with unison attacks. Unison attacks work quite differently from how they did in Tales of Symphonia. For starters, you can now build up 2 full charges for the unison attacks. Unison attacks can then be performed by pressing C on the nunchuck, in which Emil or Marta, depending on who you are playing, will hit the enemy with a pseudo Mystic Art. If the elemental grid lines up with the elemental affinity of one of the other party members, they will join in the attack too, thus increasing its damage. Along with unison attacks, Mystic Arts also return, but will cost both charges of the unison attack gauge to use. Going over to the characters themselves, despite all the monsters and Symphonia companions joining your party, you will for the most part be playing as either Emil or Marta. As the main protagonist, Emil uses a sword and is arguably the easier of the two to play. However, his arts list is one of the strangest I've ever seen, with Emil often using arts like Savage Reaper and Phoenix Rush rather than the series' established arts like Tiger Blade and Sword Rain. Even when he does use an established art, it is often played out very differently to how it's previously been seen in past games. Emil can also use special Centurion skills which will change his base arts. As for Marta, she uses a spinner. To my knowledge, she is the only spinner user in the entire series. Despite her weapon's short range, Marta makes up for it by being very mobile, with her attacks and arts often involving her jumping into or away from the enemy. This in turn makes Marta extremely difficult to play, as she often misses a lot of her attacks. As a result, I usually play Emil. Oh, and Marta is also the healer of the party with all the basic medical spells. As for the Symphonia characters, they, for the most part, play the same as they did back in Tales of Symphonia, but with a limited number of arts. They also don't level up in your party, instead joining at fixed levels that will change as the story progresses. While you can play as them, they can't be set to the player 1 slot and must be switched to mid-battle, which is kind of annoying. But that's enough about the combat, let's talk about the music. Despite being somewhat of a side project, and with 2 major Tales games on the way, Matoshi Kikuruba and Shinji Tamura have still managed to make time to compose the music for this game. With the game being a sequel to Tales of Symphonia, multiple tracks in the original game litter this score, with most towns and dungeons featuring remixes of their original tracks. This is also true for Symphonia's regular battle themes of Full Force and Like a Glint of Light, which play multiple times in dungeons associated with their respective locations from the original game. Despite the game's soundtrack being built heavily off remix tracks from Tales of Symphonia, the game also features a large plethora of new tracks such as the themes for the game's new characters and locations. We also get new regular battle themes in the form of The More I Try, and multiple boss themes for the different members of the Vanguard. Along with the revamped music, we also get fully English voiced skits for the first time in a Tales game made by the Namco Tales Studio. This makes skits a lot more enjoyable to watch, as, unlike Legendia, they are numerous and quite funny thanks to the game's more comedic approach to storytelling. Unfortunately though, you'll need to get used to your favourite Symphonia characters sounding quite different due to multiple voice actors being replaced, most notable of which is Brian Beacock, who replaces Scott Menville as the voice of Lloyd. Going over to the opening song, Mizuno Koda returns once again to give us her fourth Tales opening song in the form of Ninin Sankyaku, or Three-Legged Race in English. Ninin Sankyaku is an alright upbeat song that I like to listen to from time to time, although it doesn't always line up with the opening cinematic, like in this specific spot. As for the opening cinematic, as the game's only animated cutscene, it's actually pretty good with solid cuts and fluid action scenes. Even knowing how lame this game is, the OP always seems to get me excited to play it, which I guess is a good thing. Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World is far from the worst game associated with the Tales series, and there's quite a lot to enjoy about this game. For starters, the game is a big step up graphically over games like Symphonia and Abyss, with its more detailed environments and motion captured cutscenes. The game is also full of fan service from Tales of Symphonia, and is a great game to play for those curious what the new merged world was like after the events of Tales of Symphonia. The game also delivers a relatively easy to play battle system with its slow pace and Emil's strong attacks. However, Dawn of the New World is a heavily flawed game. Emil is a little too cowardly to be a likeable protagonist, and isn't even the one fighting, with his more edgy Ratatosk mode persona taking over in battle and being arguably the more interesting character. While Emil has some redeeming character traits, Marta is borderline insufferable. Her character is almost solely built around wanting to get with Emil. Practically every end battle screen will involve her making some kind of line about how Emil needs to love her, and it's just plain annoying and also quite derogatory to female characters in video games. I want to say this game makes up for its lame characters in its gameplay, but I really don't like the combat in this game. There's just a general sloppiness to Emil and Marta's attacks that frequently break combos as they flail off into space unless they are lined up perfectly with the enemy. The lack of TP in this game is also a bummer, as it prevents you from really getting the hang of arts before they burn out your entire TP stock. Unison attacks too charge up way too quickly and do not feel like the powerful attacks that they should. Arguably the biggest issue this game faces is its identity crisis. From the get-go, the game feels built around its monster recruiting and training system. However, the game then gives you plenty of Symphonia characters to fill out your party, so you're supposed to play with the recruited monsters or the Symphonia characters. It's for this very reason that a lot of people wish that this game had nothing to do with Tales of Symphonia and instead was its own standalone adventure. To sum up, Dawn of the New World is not necessarily a bad Tales game, as it has its place in a niche part of the fanbase, those being fans of Symphonia and monster capturing mechanics. However, I'm not in that niche, and to me this game is just a sloppy Tales battle system with some relatively unlikable characters. Luckily for people like me, we wouldn't have to wait long for a good Tales game to come, as only 2 months after this game came out, the Namco Tales Studio would release their first true 7th gen Tales game, so join me next time as I look back on Tales of Vesperia for the Xbox 360.